If it is true what former lead investigator in this case, Chief Inspector Gonzalo Amaral, has always suspected, that Madeleine was put in a freezer somewhere by her father, then it is of course of the utmost importance to find out where that freezer was. Locating it would potentially solve the case. So, let's assume that Madeleine, as Amaral suspected, was put in a freezer somewhere. Then where could it have been? No doubt it was indoors somewhere. A freezer is usually not in the open air. Since the McCanns and the rest of the Tapas group did not own any real estate in Praia da Luz or the Algarve, a third party must have been involved. A third party that made it possible to hide Madeleine, until the time was right to hide her for good. In other words, to bury her somewhere. It seems a fair conclusion that someone outside the Tapas group must have helped Kate and Jerry, by opening up a house and a freezer. There don't seem to be any other options. Someone must have helped Kate and Jerry with the fake abduction, even though it may have happened unintentionally. They would never have been able to pull this off without some help. In this episode it becomes clear that former Chief Inspector Amaral may have been right all along. I started my investigation into the possible location where Madeleine was hidden, with the assumption that whoever lent a helping hand, must have been connected in some way to Kate or Jerry. Or maybe with someone from the Tapas 7. So the pressing question on the table is, was there anyone in Praia da Luz, or in the Algarve, with a clear link to Kate or Jerry, the Tapas group, or maybe with the medical world in the UK, who may have come to the rescue? Before discussing my findings, I must emphasize that everyone mentioned in this episode is innocent, until proven guilty in a court of law. Pretty soon in my research I came across a man who caught my eye. A Portuguese man who was in his early 50s at the time of the disappearance, but more importantly, he was a doctor. And that fact alone made me curious. After all, that was a similarity with the 6 doctors in the Tapas group. I delved further into this Portuguese doctor, to learn more about him. Could I find any more similarities between him and the Tapas doctors? Was there perhaps a clear link with one of them? Or maybe he could be linked to the UK? The following is what I found out about this Portuguese doctor, a pediatrician, who was also a professor at one of the many universities of Lisbon, the city where he also lives. In an article on a news website, this professor tells how lucky he was, that he could do an internship in England at the time, when he was young. There's no mention of the time period of this internship in this article, but considering his age it must have been in the late 70s, early 80s maybe. Talking about the 80s, he was co-author of a book published in 1989 by Oxford Publishers in the UK. And talking about Oxford, he was a guest lecturer at this prestigious university. Unfortunately I couldn't establish when that took place. For now, it seems fair to say that this Portuguese professor is no stranger in the UK. And there is more. Without going into detail too much, I'll show you what else I found out about this professor. He was a member of the British Association for Community Child Health. This is a professional membership organisation for doctors and other professionals working in paediatrics and child health in the community. It is a specialty group of the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health. Now, that's interesting. It seems that this Portuguese professor was really involved in the medical and academic world in the UK. I mean, when you are lecturing at Oxford, and you're a member of a specialty group within the Royal College, then surely you are involved. Undoubtedly he must have had an extensive network of fellow doctors and professors, in the medical and academic scene in the UK. And I discovered that not only has he worked for the UK government, on specially developed programs for children to lead a healthy life, but also that he lived there. And there is still more to show. This professor was very involved with the UK. In December 2003, he wrote a comment on the website of the British Medical Journal about the usefulness of turning on car headlights during daytime. And he criticized and called for a boycott of a British TV show called Supernanny. And on a personal level, his daughter studied in London. This Portuguese professor is getting more British by the minute. I believe it's fair to say that there are many obvious and relevant links between the Portuguese professor and academia and medicine in the UK, and therefore with the tapas doctors. But there is another very important question that needs to be answered, before I can even begin to think about his involvement in the disappearance. Because he lives in Lisbon, some 200 miles north of Praia da Luz, what could he have done for the McCanns? How could he have helped? In order to answer that question, one must first consider what would have helped the McCanns. In other words, what did they need? Well, if Kate and Jerry wanted to hide Madeleine's body from the world, they needed an inconspicuous place, preferably a safe place like a normal house, so that no one could find her. A house with a freezer, according to Chief Inspector Amaral. Still, the question remains. What could he have done for the McCanns? The answer to that question has to do with the heat of summer in Portugal, especially in August. Many well-to-do residents of Lisbon flee the city for a whole month and go to their holiday homes, usually somewhere in the Algarve region. You see this coming, don't you? Yes, you guessed it right. This professor also owns a little holiday home somewhere in the Algarve. Somewhere in the Algarve? No, not somewhere. In Praia da Luz. This is crucial information, because suddenly it becomes clear this professor indeed had the opportunity to help Kate and Jerry. A holiday home, in fact, would be the ideal location to hide someone. Most of the year it's empty and locked up. No callers, postmen or meter readers would even ring the doorbell. And nobody beside the owner had access to the property, which makes it a pretty secure place. Could this be the house Chief Inspector Amaral was looking for? To demonstrate that it is quite possible that this professor's holiday home was the safe house where Madeleine was hidden, I have to take you back to the statements of the Smiths. This Irish family saw a man who looked very much like Jerry McCann, on the night of the disappearance, carrying a little blonde girl on his arm, somewhere downtown Praia da Luz. If it was Jerry they saw, as many believe, then from the spot he encountered the Smiths, he had the holiday home of the professor already in sight. In fact, Jerry was just a few meters away from the front door of the professor's home. If this was the safe house where Madeleine was hidden, it is highly likely that the professor was misled and unknowingly became involved in Madeleine's disappearance. He dedicated his life to the health and safety of children. It is therefore very difficult, if not impossible, to imagine that he was actively involved in Madeleine's hiding, and that he knew what was going on. It is much more likely that a middleman made the contact for the McCanns, so it is not necessarily the case that Kate or Jerry, or a doctor from the tapas group, had direct knowledge of this professor. Could it be the case that the Old Boys network was activated for Kate and Jerry? Was this Portuguese professor asked for a favor by someone in his network? For example, to rent out his holiday home in Praia da Luz to a doctor friend, or to a doctor friend of a fellow doctor. Or, who knows? From all the work he has done and the time he spent in the UK, we can certainly assume that he had a significant number of contacts there. However, we must assume that the professor had no direct knowledge of the events. That's the main reason why I don't mention the professor's name or show his picture. It does not add more value to the story and he certainly deserves the benefit of the doubt. But, of course, I can show his holiday home. Here it is. For the first time in all those years, it is now possible to pinpoint an exact location, based on facts and circumstances, where Madeleine may have been hidden by her father. The pieces of this puzzle fit together just a little too well to ignore, and call it coincidence. Is this the location former Chief Inspector Amaral was looking for? A house with a freezer? Only a police investigation into this professor and his holiday home can provide an answer.